Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm Jeremy Lott. Joining me today is the Center Square's investigative reporter, TJ Martinell. TJ, you did a piece titled Washington House Passes Semi-Automatic Assault Weapons Ban. I want you to talk about this, and I know you're working on another story about legislation that's percolating up, as they say, from the House to the Senate. And what's coming for Washington gun owners?
Yeah, so they passed House Bill 1240 the other day. And I think the important thing with this bill is that when they say assault weapon, most people think of an AK-47 or the popular AR-15. But this applies to just regular semi-automatic rifles. It applies to certain types of shotguns. It applies to certain types of handguns and pistols. So this is going to apply to a lot of different firearms. It's not just going to be a handful of guns that is going to be included in this new definition of an assault weapon that would be codified into state law. So I think that's one of the most important takeaways is that this is going to apply to a lot of weapons. In fact, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'd be very interested in knowing just how many firearms does it in fact apply to and what firearms does it not apply to? What's the percentage?
I assume it's a large number, and obviously we'll track that number down and report it for readers. You said something, an iteration of this, where you said that the grandfathering clause was going to be tough for grandchildren, and I initially didn't know what you meant. Because grandfathering, so that when you grandfather something, what you say is that we're not going to make the thing that you have right now, we're not going to make you change that, right? Though going forward, we're going to make it different. So you can keep the guns you have, right? That would be under a grandfathering clause. But then apparently these are under tight criteria. These are heritable weapons, but they're not doubly heritable weapons, which is the thing that you were getting at. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it's ironic that it's called the grandfather clause, and yet the grandchildren can't legally, it's important to note, this is how the bill is written. This is not, people talk about a grandfather clause, great, but what does the bill language actually say? It says that if this passes, anyone who currently has these firearms that are illegal to buy, you can keep them and you can will them to your children can inherit them, but they have to prove that you legally own them, which is an interesting, how do you prove that? That's going to be an interesting part. But this is the part that's the kicker is that's where it ends. That's the only exemption to where you can possess these weapons is either you currently own one or you inherited it from a legal owner. But that does not apply to, say, a grandchild who's inheriting it from the parent who inherited it from the grandparent. So what do you do when you're the grandkid? You're inheriting your grandfather's rifle that was passed on to your father or mother, and it is illegal under this state law for you to possess it. What do you do? Are you required to? There's no provision for what to do if you come into possession of an illegal firearm. What do you? It's like you find out that your grandfather had a Thompson submachine gun from the 1930s before they passed the federal law on machine guns. What do you do with that? What provision do they have in this state law for that?
I think we honestly should probably just do a piece on this. I don't know. We'll think about it. We can talk about it offline. But I mean, it's a grandfathering clause or a non-grandfathering grandfather clause. I don't know. This legislature has famously done things with guns they didn't mean to do. For instance, in some of the police reforms, they accidentally outlawed beanbag rounds and for cops to use beanbag rounds and had to re-legalize that in the next legislature. We're not ascribing motive. We're just saying that the Washington State Legislature famously has a hard time knowing how to regulate guns.
Well, and I think that this is kind of like having somebody who's never run a business, set business regulations, having someone who's never fired a weapon or doesn't fully understand how weapons work, trying to ban them based on aesthetics. This one, they went for the bleachers in terms of trying to define what they wanted to ban because there's so many different things that they included. And I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of firearms currently legal for sale in Washington State become illegal.
Given the current jurisprudence of the United States Supreme Court, how is this likely to fare if challenged at the federal level?
It's absolutely going to get challenged. Under no conceivable scenario would it not be challenged. After the Bruen decision and the current Supreme Court, and this is why a lot of critics of it have pointed out, why are we even bothering with this thing? It's going to get struck down.
They're passing a lot of gun stuff, throwing it against the wall and just seeing what sticks once the Supreme Court gets through it.
The other thing that's kind of fascinating is that if people actually read the Washington State Constitution, our quote unquote Second Amendment in our Bill of Rights, the right to keep and bear arms, is even more specific and far less ambiguous in terms of what right it's describing to who.
Because it's a personal right.
It specifically says it is a personal right of a private citizen to keep and bear arms in defense of themselves. So anybody who wants to make the argument, oh, well, they never wanted you to, this was only going to apply to the militia. No, in our Bill of Rights, it doesn't even mention that as part of the right. And it says that the right shall not be impaired. That's the irony, but it's going to end up in front of the United States Supreme Court. Who knows what our state Supreme Court would rule.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For TJ Martinell, this is Jeremy Lott. Please subscribe and thanks for listening.